good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to ABC 1 on 1. I want to welcome all of you on Ground Zero and in all of Sub-Sahara Africa who are watching by way of satellite. And of course, I won't forget those of you in the continent USA, including Canada, and of course, South America, Europe, Asia, all of you who are watching by means of social media, Facebook and YouTube. This is a very special broadcast, and I do not want any of you who would want to watch by way of the social media to miss it. So as usual, I give you 5 minutes for those of you on Facebook, on YouTube. Hit your share button. Let us get the platform populated for this exciting conversation between myself and, of course, Dr. Greg Stanton of Genocide Watch. So please, as you join, go ahead, hit your share button. I would like to do some housekeeping before I bring in Dr. Greg for this interview. So please go ahead, hit your share button. Hit your share button in the next 5 minutes at least. Let's get 700 people on Facebook. For those of you joining, go ahead and hit your share button again. And let's populate the platform. Okay, and while you do that, I'd like to come to you with some updates about the Southern Cameroon's revolution. Yesterday, we all watched and listened to the exclusive interview that Maurice Kamto of at Equinox Television. We came out of that interview with Maurice Kamto, taking home a number of things, I think 3 of them. Number 1, Kamto stated very succinctly that he is not in favor as a political leader, the opposition leader who looks forward to becoming the president of French Cameroon. He said he is not, ladies and gentlemen, in favor of a 2-state federation. That is what he said yesterday. He made it very clear. Number 2, Mr. Kamto also said or observed that he is not in favor of a breakaway country, referring to a one and indivisible French Cameroon, or the Republic of Cameroon as they have always called it. And lastly, Mr. Kamto said he is in favor of a special status for Southern Cameroonians, Ambazonians in Cameroon. In fact, he's added that the idea of the special status was his origination. In other words, the idea originated from him, the idea of a special status, an idea that the overwhelming majority of Ambazonians have objected to, originated from someone who looks forward to becoming president of that country, Maurice Kamto. Now, what do we get out of this, ladies and gentlemen? What we get out of Maurice Kamto's interview yesterday is that Maurice Kamto is not any more different from any average Francophone leader, French Cameroon leader. They all reason the same, they think the same. Now you will recall, ladies and gentlemen, that not too long ago, only a few months ago, when they were campaigning for the presidential elections in that country, Kamto said in a press conference that if he is elected president, he will resolve the Southern Cameroon's issue by going back to the 1961 plebiscite, in which we voted to obtain independence as a sovereign state, and the French Cameroonians obtained their independence also as a sovereign state from the French. Mr. Kamto had said during a press conference before the election that if elected president, he will resolve the Southern Cameroon's issue by going back to 1961. Now, he hasn't even been elected president yet, but now he has made a 90-degree turn around. And he is now saying he is not one of those who would argue or support a two-state federation in Cameroon. Of course, no Ambazonian, no Southern Cameroonian is looking for a two-state federation after all these killings and burning downs of whole towns and villages. None of us is looking for that. But that is a good taste for us to know. The person who may become the next president of French Cameroon. So, ladies and gentlemen, that was what we took out of Maurice Kamto's interview yesterday. One of these days, I shall be coming to you with a very, very special presentation on the subject of Kamto's Equinox interview, to give you our take right here from the interim government of Ambazonia. But I thought to bring this to you so you know what we are thinking about that interview. Now, this is very, very important that I bring this update here about what is happening in Lebialem County. Last week, French Cameroon soldiers invaded a number of villages in Lebialem County and left with a lot of casualties. Suffered so many casualties in the hands of our restoration forces. And those who succeeded to leave, they were able to leave. But we have now learned, ladies and gentlemen, we have now learned that a number of French Cameroon forces took cover in the bushes in the villages of Esoata, Inka, Injensa, and a number of other, Inje and Lekong, these areas. Now, we are passing this warning so that if you live in any of these villages, please be very, very watchful, because those troops may be looking for field marshal, as they say, but they are prone to shooting anyone who come by their side. So if you live in any of these villages, we are advising you, if it is not 3 weeks from today or 1 month from today, do not think that you are safe walking on the roads in any of these villages. These military men sleeping in the bushes can sleep in the bush. They have the capability, the ability to sleep in the bush for as long as they want, and for as long as they have enough food and water supply. So please, if you are in any of these villages, this is what is going on. French Cameroon soldiers are hiding in the bushes in Esoota, Lekong, Jensa, Inka, Nje, in Lebialem. Take note. And ladies and gentlemen, let me also remind you that, especially those of you watching from ground zero, be very, very, very informed. I mean, very, very, very reminded again that we have said from this interim government there can be no French Cameroon organized elections in the territory that is called the Southern Cameroons, Ambazonia. We have made it very clear. October 2017, we reclaim our independence, our sovereignty. And so we have since warned French Cameroon not to think of organizing any form of political event in the territory of the Southern Cameroons. We ignored their last presidential election. They did not take place in our territory. And the upcoming parliamentary elections and municipal elections, which they have announced for February the 9th, again, they are not taking place in our territory. We have learned that some NGOs are going around churches registering people for whatsoever we do not know. We have, according to the United Nations statistics, over 500,000 displaced persons in the bushes. These NGOs would not care to go to the bushes to give them humanitarian assistance, but they go around the churches registering people. What they want to do, ladies and gentlemen, is at the end of the day, when February 9 is here, they will say, these are the figures who registered for the elections. And we all know what French Cameroon can do. They will say, these are the people who voted in the southern Cameroons. So please, we are warning the churches and the pastors, do not open your doors for any form of registration. No elections are taking place in Ambazonia, and no election official is expected in Ambazonia. We do not expect to see any election official on our soil in Ambazonia. French Cameroon is free to organize election on its or her territory, but on our own territory, they are not welcome. So please, again, the churches, do not open your doors for any form of registration whatsoever. All right, I hope that is taken note of. Again, ladies and gentlemen, I gave you 5 minutes to get at least 700 people on YouTube, on Facebook. Less than 100 to go. As you join, please hit your share button so I can bring in Dr. Greg Stanton for this very, very crucial, important interview. All right, while I wait for you to populate this platform, let me take one or two more announcements. Yesterday, ladies and gentlemen, there was the announcement of the shooting of a passenger airline up the skies of Bamenda around Bafut, around the airport vicinity in Bafut. The restoration forces have taken responsibility for shooting of that plane. We are not in the habit of attacking civilians. You all know that. We have used this television channel to warn anybody attacking civilians, abducting civilians, taking ransom from civilians, talk less of planes. However, what happened yesterday, ladies and gentlemen, it was a message to French Cameroon. And the message is that we will not, Ambazonians restoration forces will not continue to allow French Cameroon use passenger airliners to transport military equipment and military personnel to attack and burn down towns and villages in that city of Bamenda. And of course, they have turned the airport itself into a military camp. And they pretend to bring in civilian airliners, pretending they are carrying passengers. We are sending a message to French Cameroon. You bring in a military jet, a passenger jet with military inside, with military equipment, we will bring it down and we shall have no apology for it. And you can give it any name you like. You call it terrorism. If you call it terrorism, then you have to explain to us what it means, what it is to burn down over 400 villages. If that is not terrorism, I don't know what else you call it. But we are sending a warning, ladies and gentlemen, to French Cameroon that we will not, going forward, we will not. We have the capabilities to bring down any jet that fly over our airspace in Ambazonia. Any military jet or any airplane we perceive carrying military equipment or military personnel, we have the capacity to bring it down, and we will bring it down. Let them take note. So that is what happened yesterday in the city of Bamenda. Ladies and gentlemen, just one more reminder. We have Our drive, ABC fundraising drive, still going on. Now you all understand, ladies and gentlemen, ABC is a non-profit organization. It is not a for-profit organization. ABC survives on your donations. ABC survives on your donations. So let me appeal to you, those of you who have not yet gone to the website to subscribe for ABC Amber Club. Just $5 or $10 or $20 a month. For those of you who have regular jobs, please, we're appealing to you. If you enjoy what we bring to you here from ABC, please support ABC and get ABC to survive. Let's make ABC another BBC for Sub-Saharan Africa. We look forward to doing so. So please, if you have not subscribed yet, get to the website, ladies and gentlemen, and do so. And do not forget the CID. If you have not also subscribed for the CID, please go ahead and do so. This revolution will go nowhere without funds, and do not expect that somebody will come from the diaspora, the international community, to fund the Amazonian revolution, the Amazonian struggle. If you love freedom, you love independence, we have to pay for it. That's all it is. If you love freedom, you love independence, you have to pay for it. No one else will pay for it on your behalf. Only you will pay for it. So, ladies and gentlemen, I have with me today, as announced the previous days, Dr. Greg Stanton, who is the founder of Genocide Watch, joining me from Virginia in the USA. Dr. Greg is an expert on the subject of genocide. And I invited him to come in here and share with us what he has learned tackling genocide issues around the world for a number of decades. He is he has a huge resume, ladies and gentlemen, on this subject of genocide, on this subject of genocide. And that is why I invited him to come in here to share with us Amazonians. Maybe he can identify a thing or two about what is going on in our territory. So I have Dr. George here to be with me for the next hour. But before I bring him in, I'd like to give you a little background of who Dr. Greg Stanton is. Again, he is a bulk of resource on genocide with a huge resume. Once more, good evening, Ambazonia, ladies and gentlemen. Dr. Greg Stanton has such a rich resume in genocide work and research. Not only is he the founder and president of Genocide Watch, he is also research professor in genocide studies and prevention at the Institute for Conflict Analysis and Resolution at George Mason University, Arlington, Virginia, of course, in the USA. From 2003 to 2009, he served as the James Farmer Professor in Human Rights at the University of Mary, Washington, in Fredericksburg, Virginia. Dr. Stanton founded Genocide Watch in 1999. He had in 1981 also founded and directed the Cambodian Genocide Project. He equally was the founder and chair in 1999 of the International Alliance to End Genocide, the world's first anti-genocide coalition. From 2007 to 2009, he was the president of the International Association of Genocide Scholars. Dr. Stanton served in the U.S. State Department from 1992 to 1999, where he drafted the United Nations Security Council resolutions that created the International Criminal Tribunal for Rwanda, the Burundi Commission of Inquiry, and the Central African Arms Flow Commission. He also drafted the United Nations peacekeeping operations resolutions that helped brought about an end to the Mozambique Civil War. In 1994, Stanton won the American Foreign Service Association's prestigious W. Alvaro Harriman Award for, I quote, extraordinary contributions to the practice of diplomacy, exemplifying intellectual courage, end of quote, based on his dissent from U.S. policy on the Rwandan genocide. He wrote the State Department options paper on ways to bring the Khmer Rouge to justice in Cambodia. Since leaving the State Department to found Genocide Watch, Stanton has been deeply involved in the United Nations Cambodian government negotiations that have brought about the creation of the Khmer Rouge Tribunal, for which he drafted internal rules of the procedure and the evidence. From 1999 to 2000, he also served as co-chair of the Washington Working Group for the International Criminal Court. Before he joined the State Department, Stanton was a legal advisor to RUKH, R-U-K-H, which is a Ukrainian independence movement, work for which he was named the Ukrainian Congress Committee of America's 1992 Man of the Year. He was the chair of the American Bar Association Young Lawyers Division Committee on Human Rights and a member of the ABA's Standing Committee on World Order under Law. Gregory Stanton comes from the lineage of Elizabeth Cady Stanton, women's suffrage activist, and Henry Brewster Stanton, anti-slavery leader, actively involved in human rights in the 1960s when he was a voting rights worker in Mississippi. He served as a Peace Corps volunteer in the Ivory Coast and as a Church World Service care field director in Cambodia in 1990. He has been a law professor at Washington and Lee and American universities and the University of Swaziland. Dr. Stanton has degrees from Oberlin College, Harvard Divinity School, Yale Law School, and a master's and doctorate in cultural anthropology from the University of Chicago. He was a fellow at the Woodrow Wilson International Center for Scholars from 2001 to 2002. Above all, ladies and gentlemen, he and the wife have not only visited the Cameroons, they spent quite a good amount of time in the southern Cameroons, Ambazonia, before the current conflict. He is an avid follower of the conflict in the Cameroons and has written quite a number of papers on the genocide situation in the southern Cameroons. He has published a paper on what he calls the 10 stages of genocide And from his expertise, he believes genocide is being perpetuated in the southern Cameroons today. Dr. Stanton, it's a privilege once more to have you, sir, and welcome to ABC. I hope you can hear me.
I can hear you very well. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Doctor. Such a rich genocide research background, sir. What took you into this? What was the subject of interest to you?
I think the real calling came when I was in Cambodia and saw what genocide had done to that country. In 1980, when I was working to set up the relief program after the Khmer Rouge had been overthrown, and what I saw was a country that had lost a quarter of its population, that had mass graves all over the country, and in which 2 million people out of 8 million in the population had been murdered. And I think from that experience, I realized that
8 million of the population had been murdered.
No, 2 million out of 8 million
2 million out of 8 million. No, okay, that is still huge, though.
A quarter of the population had been killed by the Khmer Rouge. And you know, when you see something that massive, I realized the rest of my life I needed to devote to trying to end this scourge on mankind that genocide is.
So, you have written quite a number of papers on Cameroon. I guess you have been writing on what is going on, the current conflict in Cameroon now, am I correct?
Yes, indeed. Mm-hmm.
And you have also written the 10 stages of genocide. Do you consider from your study what is going on in the Cameroons genocide?
Yes, I do.
And can you throw some light into that? How do you come to classifying? How do you make it a genocide?
Okay. Perhaps I should begin by explaining the model of how genocide develops that is in our 10 stages of genocide.
Sure.
So that you can see the logic that leads up to a conclusion that genocide is occurring. Every genocide follows certain stages, that is, certain steps. It's not a linear model that I'm suggesting, because the stages can occur simultaneously. Nevertheless, it's a logical model that helps us to understand the genocidal process. And the first stage is classification, in which one group is classified as different from another group. In this case, of course, you have the southern Cameroon being classified separately from the French-speaking part of Cameroon. And you also have all the different tribal groups and ethnic groups that are in these different parts of Cameroon. You also then, secondly, have symbolization, which is the second stage, in which certain ways become evident for knowing who belongs to these different classifications. It's very clear in southern Cameroon that being an English speaker is one of those important ways that people know who belongs to this southern Cameroon as opposed to French-speaking Cameroon. Of course, British colonial history also is part of that. The third is discrimination. Discrimination in which the targeted group is discriminated against in jobs, in benefits from the government, and many other things like that. And we have a situation, for instance, now in Cameroon, in which English-speaking Cameroon is excluded for many of the jobs in the central government in Yaoundé. That kind of discrimination really is a early indicator. Now, you can have all those three without having genocide. But when you get to the fourth one, which is dehumanization, in which the group that is going to carry out the genocide actually dehumanizes the other group, says these are really animals, or these are insects, or they are, traitors to our country, or they're terrorists. This kind of dehumanizing language is a sign that you have a genocidal process underway.
And if I may stop you a little bit there, because you mentioned those labels as a sign to genocide, and all of that have actually been officially pronounced in Cameroon. You have a situation
Yes.
where in Cameroon, Southern Cameroonians have been declared dogs. They have been called dogs by sitting governors or French appointed by French Cameroon. You have a situation where Southern Cameroonians are called Biafrans, referring to the Igbo part of Nigeria. You have situations where Southern Cameroonians are being called two cubes of sugar by officials of the French Cameroon government. And I think you are right on point when you point out to those levels. Go ahead, sir.
Right. The next crucial stage in genocide is what is the organization stage, in which you actually have organized groups that are used to terrorize and to carry out killings and so forth against the targeted group. In this case, the organized group is clearly the Cameroonian army. You don't need militias or anything like that when you have a state actually carrying out the attacks. The organized group can actually be on both sides in this case, because you also have, if it's an armed conflict, the possibility of what you could call a dual kind of problem. The separatist movements, for instance, as the Amazonian movement is, these movements tend to bring out the forces of genocide from governments, because governments never want to lose their territory. They never want to lose their power. So separatist movements can be a major trigger for genocide. In fact, next stage after organization is polarization. The sixth stage is polarization, in which you already have a polarized country, in which part of it is, English-speaking, Southern Cameroon. The other part is French-speaking. And you also have a government that has intentionally polarized its institutions. For a while, at the beginning of the Cameroonian history, in which you had a federal system at the very beginning, the idea was that the English-speaking institutions in southern Cameroon could continue as English-speaking institutions. But recently, there has been an attempt to impose French as the language all over, even in southern Cameroon, to impose courts in which the only judges are French-speaking.
If I may ask you, Dr. Greg, you visited Cameroon. How long were you there?
Oh, we were there about a month. We went to Bamenda, we went to Wum, we went to a whole number of areas in southern Cameroon. We've also been to Yaoundé, to Douala. We've gone up country a ways and so forth. I've never gotten to the far north of Cameroon, which I always wanted to go to. Although I think it'd be pretty dangerous right now because of Boko Haram.
Right. And
but
if we may go back to the history that you were trying to quote there, have you taken some time to study the history of the two Cameroons?
We have. Yes, I have, of course. I
And
am, because I'm
yes, go
a
ahead.
cultural anthropologist, and my specialty is Africa. I've spent a lot of time reading about the history. Um, so I know, about the plebiscite, and I know about the history of um, the Hijo government's dissolution of the federalist system, the attempt to essentially make it a unitary, centralized government, which I think was a huge mistake. Uh, and the way in which Western Cameroon was able to be, in many ways, autonomous, but recently, um, more and more, the central government has not permitted the kind of autonomy that was originally intended for southern Cameroon.
The Southern Cameroonians are arguing that there wasn't complete decolonization of English Cameroon in 1961, and as such, there was also, by the time the plebiscite in 1961 was conducted and a so-called union with French and English Cameroon took place, there has never been any articles of association, no articles of union. And so
Mm-hmm.
they feel like uh, they went into this arrangement with all good faith. But
Mm-hmm.
going by the history of the assimilation and the marginalization and essentially colonization, they have said we are opting out of this. Do you see, as a an anthropology and somebody who specializes in studying Africa, do you think that Southern Cameroonians are making a good case for pulling out of French Cameroon as an expert?
This is a real. This is a question, frankly, that I'm not qualified to answer because I'm not Cameroonian. Um, people in Cameroon know your own history far better than I ever could. Um, I am a federalist in the sense that I'm an American, and what we've seen in America is, in spite of all of its problems, federalism has turned out to be a good system in this country um, because it recognizes differences and yet also allows for unity. Um, we have, as you know, state governments that make our criminal laws, that carry out most of our criminal laws, that run our police forces, that govern most things that we do. I mean, the state of the Commonwealth of Virginia, for instance, really is the government for us in
Right.
Virginia for the most
We have no
part.
doubt. We have no doubt that federalism is a great system. But the problem we have in Cameroon is that Cameroon considers federalism to be secession. And so they have said no to federalism, no to
Yes,
anything that would separate
yes.
the two entities apart. That is a problem we have. Some people have said, look
It,
at the example of Canada. I said, yes, the example of Canada is a great thing. Quebec almost
yeah,
ruled itself from the rest of Canada. But we don't
right.
have, and we never have, that opportunity in the Cameroons because the French Cameroon government sees anything federalism as secession.
Hmm.
So
Yes, and
when you find yourself in a situation where you can't get federalism, as it was denied us, what do you do?
well, that is a huge problem. And well, you may know, of course, the history of the United States and how much we have fought over federalism because we even had a civil war over it that cost more lives than any other war in American history. 600,000 American lives were lost in our Civil War over the issue of federalism because the South in the United States was had the institution of slavery, a terribly evil institution that dehumanized all Africans and African Americans, and it was a completely separate system. Um, Eventually, the North, which did for the most part, didn't have slavery, said we can't go on as a union with half slave and half free. And so when the South decided to secede from the Union, that was part of the issue. It was a huge issue because, frankly, human beings were treated as though they were things, as though they were property. And the North, the Abraham Lincoln and other people who were leaders in the North said we can't have that anymore in the United States, and so the South seceded. Now, I don't mean to, of course, make that a parallel at all, because it's very different than what you face in Cameroon. It's why I say American federalism is not a very good model for you, perhaps. But what it boils down to for me is federalism has, and of course the North won that war, and we still have a unified country. But it's a war, though, that you have to go to the South to realize is still deep in the hearts of a lot of Southerners. A lot of Southerners are still not very happy being part of the same country with the North. And I think, by the way, that Trump's election is a good example of that.
Okay, Doctor, let's get back to the subject of genocide. You acknowledge that what is going on in the Cameroons is genocide. How would you rate it between 1 to 10?
Yes. Well, let me first finish with the next stage, the final stages.
Okay, right.
Because after polarization, stage 6, you get preparation, stage 7, in which the country that is, or the people who are planning the genocide actually do the preparation, the planning of it. If you have a really clear case of preparation of genocide, as you did with, for instance, the Nazis during the Holocaust, they actually prepare the SS troops or whoever to do it, to carry out the genocide. You can also simply have preparation in the form of planning of raids on villages. Genocidal massacres is what we call these. And you've had at least 400 of those in southern Cameroon.
Right.
And so at that stage, you move to the 8th stage, which is persecution, where you really have serious persecution of those who are targeted. And that has been going on now for at least a couple of years in southern Cameroon. You get to the stage 9 level, which is the actual genocide, in which you actually have mass killings. You can also have conditions of life which are aimed at destroying a group. For instance, you can have sending people out into deserts or starving them to death, things like that going on. That is a genocidal tactic. Making everyone, for instance, flee into the bush or into places they have not got enough food and water and so forth, that's a genocidal tactic. So that's why I believe that you have a situation of genocide going on right now in southern Cameroon. It's one that the world should no longer ignore. Now, how do you solve genocide? Well, that is a huge problem, because you've got a United Nations that very seldom will intervene to try to stop a genocide. And in my own view, negotiations is one way to stop genocides, but also self-defense, frankly. People who are being targeted need to have a way to defend themselves. I think self-defense is still the best defense against genocide.
So, how would you rate the situation in the southern Cameroons between the grades of 1 and 10?
Oh, I think you're at 9, which is genocide, actual extermination. 10, by the way, is denial. It is where that's the stage that always goes all the way through a genocide. and continues on afterwards, after the genocide is all over. I mean, you'll have genocides like, the Turkish genocide of the Armenians, for instance, in which they are still denying that they carried out this genocide 100 years later. That's denial. That's the final stage. But and right now, of course, the Cameroonian government is going to be denying that they're doing this.
Right.
And so they're already in denial. So I'd say, they're at 9, 10, and 11. I'm sorry, at 8, 9, and 10. They're at, persecution, extermination, and also denial. All of those stages are in operation right now.
Now, you drafted articles for the United Nations, working for the U.S. State Department. And talking about the United Nations, one of the concerns of most Africans, not just Southern Cameroonians, is that the United Nations doesn't show up when there are crises of the nature that we have in the Southern Cameroons. They would have to wait until almost everybody else is killed before they begin to rush into the field. Look at Rwanda, for instance. And what can be done? I mean, people in your position have the leverage to advocate for some reforms. What can be done to change that attitude of the United Nations, especially when it comes to African nations?
I agree completely, of course, and that's why I was a dissenter in the State Department during the Rwandan genocide. I said, look, this is a genocide. We can't, stay back and do nothing about this. And instead, the UN Security Council voted to withdraw all of the 2,500 UN troops that were in Rwanda at the beginning of that genocide, rather than having them stay to defend the people who were being targeted. The result, 800,000 people were murdered in Rwanda. It's shameful. It is the worst example, I think, of criminal complicity, really, in a genocide that I can think of. So what can be done is, in my view, first of all, the Perm 5, that is the permanent members of the United Nations Security Council that have a veto over action by the UN, have to come to some kind of an agreement that when it comes to genocide, they will not use that veto to stop UN action.
Is that a legislation that can be sponsored or what? Or does it exist?
It could indeed. It could be sponsored. It could be a UN resolution that would be agreed to. It could become an international treaty in which those countries agree that if there is a finding of genocide by the Security Council in which no one exercises a veto, in other words, all you have to have is a majority saying, look, this is a genocide, then those countries won't veto action by the UN. Now, this is a dream at this point because, of course, the permanent 5 members of the UN Security Council are unlikely to give up their veto power at this point. But I think that should happen sometime, and especially for genocide.
You founded Genocide Watch. Didn't you think this was one of the reforms you could have pursued with your organization, given the leverage that you had?
Yes, indeed. And it is one of the things we still advocate, that such a treaty be formulated and that be agreed to by the permanent 5 members, in fact, for all of the United Nations. But the second thing that we have found is regional organizations under Article 8 of the UN Charter can take action even without UN Security Council approval. In other words, ECOWAS, the Economic Community of West African States, which is very frequently led by Nigeria, has taken action in several genocides in Sierra Leone, in Liberia, and effective action. It has stopped those genocides. So that kind of action is still possible under the UN Charter, even if the UN Security Council doesn't approve it. And that is, I'm convinced, right now, the greatest hope that we have for actually stopping genocide when it develops. To prevent it, of course, is a better policy of all. That's the best policy. So having the UN actively pursue and bring about negotiations between opposing sides in a genocidal situation, and I think this is one, in between Southern Cameroon and the central government in Yaoundé. I think that is a situation where, the good offices of the United Nations need to be invoked. I know that they have been, there has been negotiation using the UN's forces, UN special offices, as they call them diplomatically. I believe they should make that, every country should make that a priority, to bring about peace in southern Cameroon. And if the central government in Yaoundé won't agree to this and continues to attack people in southern Cameroon, well, then we need to impose sanctions on those people who are ordering those kinds of attacks. I mean targeted sanctions. I don't mean on the general public, but I mean people who are doing these things need to be punished for it.
Now, you talked about the need for self-defense at the 9 and 10 stages of genocide. Now, when this happened in the case of the southern Cameroons, French Cameroon would want the international community to label self-defense as terrorism. Would you consider that terrorism? Well,
as you may know, terrorism is when civilian populations are attacked, for the most part. And in most cases, as I understand it,
so are you saying, let me cut you a little short there, I'll let you to come back. Are you saying that the government of Cameroon is a terrorist government for attacking the number of civilians they have attacked and killed?
Yes, indeed, I would say that. And I would say, though, that, in a situation like this, where you have a separatist movement, and Ambazonia has a separatist movement, has declared that it wants to be a separate and independent country. When you have that kind of thing happening, you get to a situation of war and civil war. And a lot of people think, well, genocide and civil war aren't the same thing. They can't exist they can't be the same thing at the same time. Well, that's wrong. The truth is most civil wars result in some kind of genocidal behavior or war crimes or crimes against humanity. So you'll have it, in fact, from both sides. In other words, one of the big mistakes our diplomats made during the Rwandan genocide was to assume that because there was a civil war aspect to that it couldn't also be genocide. The truth is most genocides occur during civil wars. So this is unfortunately what I think is happening in Cameroon.
So we agreed on that. The question is it possible to stop genocide before stopping the war?
You could probably try to get the leadership of the country that is perpetrating the genocide to agree to some kind of ceasefire. In other words, you might be able to stop the war and the genocide simultaneously. That's what would be the best thing. I don't know whether that's possible in this case. It would mean, of course, an agreement by both sides not to attack. Personally, that's what I think should happen right now in southern Cameroon. It would require active will by both sides to agree to that. I'm hopeful that that still could happen. And I don't know how it could happen, but perhaps with the assistance of the UN, probably or with the African Union. The biggest problem with the UN and the African Union is these are organizations made up of existing states.
Correct.
So they tend to see all problems as though they were problems that were problems of their own kind of nation state. So they don't want to allow for separatist movements. You know, separatist movements for them are a threat to
Correct.
their national status. So it's very hard to get sympathy from the UN or from the African Union and so forth for a separatist movement. It takes an internal process in which in a country, for instance, this has happened, as you know, in Ethiopia, where they had a war going on for a long time, until finally they said, enough of this, we're going to adopt a federal system, and we're going to allow Eritrea, for instance, to become independent. Eritrea had been fighting for its independence for 50 years. So Eritrea became independent. Unfortunately, it didn't solve the problem right away because Ethiopia and Eritrea got into another war between each other. But that now has been settled, finally. My own hope is that the African countries that are around Cameroon could participate in this process also. Now, I don't know, of course, what Amazonian leaders think about Nigeria right now. I have met and know some of the leaders of Nigeria during my many years of working. I know Obasanjo, for instance, President Obasanjo, who, by the way, I think is one of the great leaders of Nigeria, really the man who finally brought Nigeria back to democracy, and who's, by the way, right now pretty critical.
The problem that we have with Nigeria, Doctor, is Nigeria is having its own problems. They have the Boko Haram problem. They have been collaborating with French Cameroon in the north of Cameroon to quell Boko Haram. Then in east of Nigeria, you have the Igbos, the Biafrans, who believe they should not be a part of Nigeria. And the proximity of the southern Cameroons to the Igbos makes the current Nigerian government very, very jittery of what will become of an independent southern Cameroons vis-a-vis the Igbos. I think they are afraid supporting the southern Cameroons may just say to the Igbo, okay, you support southern Cameroons for independence and then deny us. So I think this is what is going on in Nigeria, and so they are not ready to say southern Cameroons will stand with you. This is the problem there. Then other neighboring countries, you have dictatorships in the Gabon, dictatorships in the Equatorial Guinea, which are the neighboring countries. So they are now ready to go against their colleague dictator in the person of Paul Biya. That is a problem in most of Africa, and why the southern Cameroon is not finding easy support in Africa. But let's come back to the international world. You have aptly described the regime, or the Cameroon regime, as a terrorist regime. Are there no countries around the world, I'm talking about the superpowers, that would say, let's take out this guy and resolve this problem once and for all?
That is really a big one. I don't know whether most of the leaders in the world would be in favor of trying to overthrow that government. As you know, the Biya government has been in power longer than I think any other government that I can think of.
Oh, yes, sure. They've been in power for, I think, 38 years.
Since 1982.
Yes.
I mean, that is a long time. So, and you're right, absolutely right, that dictators around the world don't like to have any example of their colleagues being overthrown because it might it might indicate what could happen to them.
Right.
You're right, and you're right also about Gabon, which is right next door. By the way, I understand what you said about the Igbos because I had a very, personal knowledge of the Nigerian Civil War because I was in the Ivory Coast during the Nigerian Civil War, and that was when the Igbos were sending a lot of babies out to Ivory Coast to refugee camps,
Right.
so they would survive, because there was the Nigerian government was essentially had a food embargo on Biafra, and it was keeping enough food from going into people. About 1 million people died during that whole civil war, and in fact, Dr. Ojukwu, who was the leader of Biafra, actually fled to the Ivory Coast, became a refugee there, and I have met him. I told him, I said, "What were you thinking when you decided to declare independence? My goodness sakes, you're up against really a superpower in Africa." Anyway, he said, "Well, we're probably wrong," is what his answer was. But anyway, he was a doctor. So in fact, he practiced directly in the building directly opposite where the maternity center where my wife was delivering babies. My wife's a nurse midwife. And so we were both in the Peace Corps. So anyway, I have a special feeling for that whole area. And we've been to Biafra too. We've been to the Igbo part of Nigeria. So I understand what you're saying about the jitteriness of the Nigerian government about this whole situation. I truly am a federalist in the sense that I hope the world will see eventually that the best solution to these kinds of conflicts is to allow people to have as much autonomy as possible over their own affairs, over their own governments. Let them rule themselves. Let them use their own languages. Don't declare official languages and things like this that you have to speak in court and things like that. We, in this day and age, need to face the fact that human tribalism is a way of thinking of the past. It doesn't mean that we can't be proud of our cultures, because we can be, we should be, but to transcend it, to get beyond it, to see that we're actually all part of one race, the human race. I think that's what we need to get to. And
Doctor,
federal
when
government.
you were in the southern Cameroons, Bamenda, Mamfe, Boya,
Yes.
and so on, were you surprised that most of the public signs you found there were in French?
Well, yes, I was. Of course, they had also signs in English. Yes,
Yes,
but
it had some in English. And
yeah,
you find the translations of those signs into English. Sometimes the translations are very funny. I don't know where you found any. But
yes,
you have drafted the resolution, the UN resolution that led to the creation of the International Criminal Tribunal for Rwanda. In the
yeah.
case of the southern Cameroon, the genocide going on in the southern Cameroon, how does the southern Cameroon get the case of its genocide to the International Criminal Court as you would have with Rwanda? What would you suggest?
Well, there's the best way for the International Criminal Court, and I'm a real believer in the International Criminal Court. The best way would be to have some kind of arrangement by which there would be actual recognition of a government for Ambazonia, in which the Ambazonian government could then declare that it signs and it becomes a party to the Rome Statute of the International Criminal Court. In other words, it becomes capable of referring cases
Yes.
to the International Criminal Court. And so if it had been a case, that a certain person from Cameroon, a general or someone, had committed genocide in its territory in southern Cameroon, it could then send that case up to the ICC in The Hague, and in turn they would do an investigation and eventually could issue an arrest or warrant. And if that person was able to be reached, that is, you could actually arrest him, in person. You could get him tried in the ICC. I do think that's a possibility if you had recognition of the independence of Amazonia. The problem is, if you can't get recognition of Amazonia, at least you should have the Cameroon be able to refer a case to the ICC.
Well,
That would take.
Cameroon will absolutely not declare any case to the ICC. But then my question would be, in the absence of the Southern Cameroons, Amazonia not getting independence, is it possible that friendly partners can refer Cameroon to the ICC for committing genocide?
The International Criminal Court isn't the place to do that, because the International Criminal Court can only try individuals. It can't try states. So you have to, and it also, there's two ways to get jurisdiction in the International Criminal Court. One is if the crime is committed on the territory of a state party to the International Criminal Court. And I think Cameroon is a state party, so that's a possibility. The second is if a national of a country that is a state party, in this case a Cameroonian national, committed the crime, then that person could be tried by the International Criminal Court. So both of those are possible. The third way is to have the UN Security Council refer the case of that person to the ICC. But if you want to have a case actually brought against the government of Cameroon for committing genocide, that has to be done on a state versus state basis, in which another state that is a party to the Genocide Convention says, you have committed genocide. You have violated the Genocide Convention, Cameroon. And so we bring our dispute with you over this to the International Court of Justice, a different court, International Court of Justice, which also is in The Hague. It's a much older court than the International Criminal Court. That is what has just happened when Gambia brought its case against Myanmar to the International Court of Justice, a case that's going to be heard in its first hearing on December 10th this year. So that kind of thing can be done. So if you got a case, you could put the evidence together that genocide has been committed by the armed forces of Cameroon in anywhere in southern Cameroon or wherever. Then some other state that's a party to the Genocide Convention could in fact charge Cameroon with violating the Genocide Convention. It's possible.
Is it possible to work with groups like yours to follow up cases like this?
Well, our group is in fact one of the NGOs that that pressed for countries to bring a case against Myanmar for its genocide against the Rohingya Muslims of Myanmar. We pressed for it and talked to lots of policymakers. And in this case, it turned out that the Minister of Justice, the Attorney General of Gambia, had been a prosecutor at the Rwandan tribunal And he realized what genocide is. He took a trip to the refugee camps in Bangladesh. He interviewed the survivors. He said, yes, this is genocide. And he said, I'm going back to Gambia, and we are going to sue um, Myanmar in the International Court of Justice for this violation. So it is possible, yes. And our group was one of the groups that advocated this policy and lobbied for it. So it wasn't just us, of course. It takes a lot of different groups trying to bring the facts forward.
Now, your group or you personally have also been involved in the international peace negotiations. I think the case of Mozambique is in your
Yeah.
resume. Uh, what, according to you, should parties looking for negotiations be planning to bring to table? I mean, give using the example of the French Cameroon and the Southern Cameroons, which history you know a little bit.
Yeah. I'm not I'm not a professional negotiator of peace agreements as much as I was a implementer of um, the UN role in carrying out the peacekeeping mission in Mozambique that helped to create the setting, the atmosphere, and not just the atmosphere, but the actual physical setting for peace in Mozambique. Disarmament of the two sides, for instance, reintegration of the armed forces of the two sides, into peaceful um, sides, so that actual peace could be carried out. The But as far as negotiations are concerned, one of the basic principles is to try to find common ground. To say, look, it's not in our interest to have killing on our side, and it's not in your interest to have your uh, army people in our territory carrying out killings. They don't really want to do that. Uh, let's try to figure out a way in which we can end this killing. That kind of common ground, I think, is the first thing to go for. That's what really, I think, brought about the end of the Mozambique Civil War. It had gone on for so long, and so many people had died, so many people were displaced. Literally hundreds of thousands of people had been displaced. It was sheer misery in Mozambique. Um, I lived in Swaziland when that war was still going on, in fact. And it was a thrill to me to be able to participate in getting peace brought to that country.
Uh, right. So, what advice would you give to Southern Cameroon leaders who are in this conflict, uh, asking, asking to get their country back? When you find a situation where the other party, French Cameroon, is saying no federation, no secession, no separation, country remains one and indivisible. What advice do you give to Southern Cameroonians?
I guess the first advice I would give comes out of my experience really here in the civil rights movement in the United States and also in the Ukrainian independence movement, because I was legal advisor to the independence movement in Ukraine. This was when the Soviet Union was still at full power. Um, Nobody thought the Soviet Union could be defeated, uh, but I knew it could be. And the reason it could be was through the will of the people, the united will of the people in Ukraine to not cooperate with the Soviet system, to peacefully uh, not cooperate with the Soviet system. Uh, they had huge rallies in the middle of Kiev. I remember because I used to speak at them. But 5,000 people But one of the first things they did when I first arrived in '89 was they asked me, Professor Stanton, what should we do? And I said, well, study the techniques of the civil rights movement in America, because, and after all, Martin Luther King learned his techniques from Mohandas Gandhi in India. These are really transhuman techniques. These are pan-human techniques. Human beings can use them anywhere. The techniques of nonviolent resistance, I am convinced, are the strongest ways to press for human rights and for autonomy for a group, for a group of people who've been oppressed. You know, I think the biggest problem with the use of violence is that it brings about more violence from the other side. I mean, it's not just a question of tit for tat. It is a question in which it accelerates the violence. And so I guess the first thing I would suggest to the leaders of the independence movement, and I would prefer to call it, I think, an autonomy movement in southern Cameroon, because I don't think right now the word independence is going to get much sympathy from most of the nation states of the world. So you're going to have a real problem with that.
What is the difference between independence and autonomy?
Autonomy means that you have self-government over most important things in your own territory, in your own lives. You may not want autonomy over everything, such as foreign policy, for instance, or, you know, I don't know, in this country, we have a constitution, as you know, that divides up the powers between the federal government and the state governments. And the state governments hold a huge number of the powers. The federal government can do, have the national defense, and they can build roads and things like that. But there are whole areas the federal government's not allowed to even participate in.
The problem, Doctor, the problem there is you find a situation in French Cameroon where they want to tell you what you should be. They want to tell you, we're going to give you some special status. Whatever is in that special status, nobody knows. Whereas these are two countries that came together. If there was a democratic system, you would expect the government to say, okay, let parliament decide. Table the law. Let's decide what this country, the form of state of this country. But no, you have a few leaders who sit on top there, and they are saying, we will give you this special status. In the U.S., you know, we're calling that handicap status, where you go to the supermarket and you park on a special spot.
That's right. Well, as you may know, it is a problem. You'll be amused at this, though, because our history in the United States is a lot of our colonies, as they were then called, that became states, were not at all interested in having the federal government tell them what to do. We had Patrick Henry right here in Virginia, for instance. He was a Virginian, and he was famous at one point in the Virginia House of Delegates, the legislature for the state of Virginia, before it became independent, saying, I do not want a bunch of New Yorkers, those foreigners in New York, telling us what to do. I mean, seriously, that's a quote from him. He considered New York to be foreigners. So, you know, we in some ways had a similar history. We were like two countries, or in this case, 13 countries that came together and decided to form a federal government. Now it's hard for people to remember that because they think of the United States as one place, you know. But the original states really considered themselves separate governments, separate nations. So there are some parallels to other countries, of course, too. This whole process, I'm convinced, of coming together in the world is one that we will see more and more of. But the whole important part of it, though, that we can't forget, is maintaining the integrity, the cultural integrity, particularly, of the different parts that come together. That's why if the federal government, if the unified government in Yaoundé won't allow for the cultural uniqueness of southern Cameroon to be expressed and to have full control over its own law, for instance, you use the common law. You use English-speaking traditions. Why shouldn't you be allowed to do that?
When you have the civil law judges in our courts, and you have the teachers in our schools, you have the attorney generals in our courts, you have their clerks in our courts, it is impossible.
It is
common law.
It's why they need to, I think, allow for separate court systems. Southern Cameroon needs to have its own separate court system. We allow that in one state, for instance, in the United States, because Louisiana, for instance, was a French colony. And so they still use civil law in Louisiana. It's the one non-common law state in our federal system. So, you know, it's possible. It works, in fact. You know, it really annoys me because I know French culture also because I served in the Ivory Coast and speak fluent French. And I know that has always been a French tradition to want centralized government. Right. You know, everything goes to Paris. I mean, it really, and I think it's a mistake. I think that you need to allow for a lot more local autonomy.
Well, we are looking forward to hoping that we get not just autonomy, we get independence, because it's been a bad experience having autonomy with French Cameroon. You find a situation where everything is subsequently taken away and you are left with nothing. You are essentially stripped. You are left with nothing. Yeah. Doctor, I'm opening the phones to take a few questions from our listeners to you. Let me start with this one. Hello, sir.
Hello.
Hello.
Hi, Chris. I don't know. Can I participate? Can I ask him a question?
Absolutely. Where are you calling from, please?
Yes, I'm calling from Michigan.
Okay. And what is the question?
Yeah, the question that I have, Chris, I used his 10 stages on the site, Ambassador Genocide Library, and he can go there and get everything that relates to Cameroon. But my question to him is, if he were to write a commission of inquiry to Cameroon, what would that look like? Because he did one for Burundi.
Yes,
okay, Doctor, that's a great question. If you were to write a commission of inquiry for Cameroon, what would it look like? You did one for Burundi.
Yes, indeed.
Thank you.
And it was a very significant one because it was the first commission that declared that genocide had occurred in Burundi and could occur again. In this case, you can, if you want a UN commission, there are several ways to do it. One is, if you want a UN Security Council created commission of inquiry, you get a resolution put together by one of the members of the Security Council, and actually you can use the Burundi Commission of Inquiry resolution as a model if you want. It's pretty simple. That's, I believe, Resolution 1012 or 1013. Anyway, it was in, that's a one commission of inquiry resolution you can look at. Another way to do it is through the General Assembly, which has the power to create commissions of inquiry. Another is to ask the UN Human Rights Council to appoint a commission of inquiry. And that can be done, again, through action by the Human Rights Council, which all it takes is a resolution by the Human Rights Council, and then a commission is appointed, usually by the High Commissioner for Human Rights. So those three methods are ones that I would say would be very effective. And even under the Human Rights Council, you can do it in several ways. It can be an official inquiry, or it can be an independent fact-finding mission, such as was created for Myanmar. That has its advantages because there the commissioners are not subject to approval. That is, that their findings are not subject to approval by the Human Rights Council. They simply can issue their own report. And if you get, independent, courageous people appointed to the commission, it can be a very devastating report. And that is, in fact, what happened with Myanmar. A 444-page report that lays out all the facts about the genocide and the crimes against humanity that have been committed by the Myanmar government against the Rohingya people. So that is all possible to do.
Okay. The caller also mentioned a website that we have. It's not owned by us, owned by one of us. I don't think you have been there. It is called AmazoniaGenocideLibrary.com. It's loaded with physical photographs of the atrocities going on in the southern Cameroons on a daily basis. But we warn you, what you will see there may be mind-boggling. You got to be very, very cautious opening the site because the images there are very, very gory. Now, let me take you to the next caller. Hello, sir.
Yes, hello.
Hello. Where are you calling from, please?
This is Sezako Titi. I'm calling from Houston, Texas. First and foremost, I want to thank you, Sector Chris, for the good work we are doing.
Thank you, sir.
Before I ask my question, I want to thank Dr. Greg for the services he's doing, but I do have a very quick question. In your capacity, Dr. Greg, what are you doing to alert the international community on this genocide and atrocities currently being committed by the military of French Cameroon to the people of minority English-speaking Southern Cameroons?
Okay, thank you for the question, sir. Dr. Greg, I hope you heard him. He is asking, in your capacity as the founder of Genocide Watch, and not just that, you are an expert, is there anything that you can do in this situation in the Cameroons with your organizations and your partners?
Yes, indeed. Genocide Watch is actually the chair of an alliance of organizations, which we founded in 1999, the Alliance Against Genocide, which has 75 member organizations around the world, many of which are much larger than Genocide Watch. The International Crisis Group, for example, is one of our members, and they are huge compared to us. The Minority Rights Group is another one. So these organizations can carry out a lot of on-the-ground field research. That's one thing that can be done. Much of our work at Genocide Watch is behind the scenes with government policymakers. We have very close relations, for instance, with the Human Rights Bureau in the U.S. State Department. I'm a personal friend of the current Assistant Secretary of State for Human Rights, Robert Destro. He was a co-founder with me of the Genocide Working Group here in Washington, D.C. before he became Assistant Secretary. So when we go to the State Department, and I have a meeting there this week, in fact, about, in this case, India. But when we go to the State Department, people there know me, and they know of our organization, and they know when we go with others who are part of our alliance, that we're not, some fly-by-night strange group of people. We actually think at least a little bit practically, and like some of them can try to figure out solutions to some of these problems. We also have many contacts inside the UN. For instance, the Special Advisor on Prevention of Genocide, Adama Dieng, is a personal friend, and in fact is on the board of advisors of Genocide Watch. And we also, of course, have many friends around the world through our alliance members. So those are the sorts of things we can do to try to bring this to the attention of policymakers. Some of our organizations will sponsor letters to policymakers that we will co-sign. They'll write op-ed pieces for newspapers, and so we're trying to inform the public about the atrocities that are committed and what needs to be done to stop these things. So these are sorts of things that an NGO can do. They're not as powerful, nearly as powerful as what a government can do, of course. But through some of the people we know in governments, you can get some results that might be useful.
Thank you. Thank you. Let me get to the next caller. Hello.
Hello there, Senator Chris. I would like to ask him, what is South Cameroons in the UN? Are we an independent nation? Did the UN vote for our independence? And if so, how do we get it? Because everybody seems to be against what we are doing. How should we get our full independence if at all the UN voted for our independence? How do we get there?
All right. Thank you. Thank you for the call. Let me put the question in perspective, Dr. Greg. He is saying that the UN voted 1961, Article 1608, to grant independence to the southern Cameroons, but apparently that process wasn't followed through. Like in the case of every other nation in Africa, you had Nigeria, you had French Cameroon, you had Ghana, you had Gabon, you had even a small Equatorial Guinea with less than 500,000 people at a time. But that same process was denied. The southern Cameroons never completed. So he is asking, I know this is necessarily not your domain, but you work at the State Department as a diplomat. What would it take for the UN to say, you know what? Yeah, we made a mistake. Let us revisit this case.
Mm-hmm. That's a hard question, actually, because within the structure of the international system, there is the process of recognition that is usually necessary. Recognition is a formal diplomatic acknowledgement of the official legitimacy of a nation state. And it used to be that, in fact, recognition was absolutely essential to have that happen. Nowadays, the formal process of recognition, I think, is less important than the actual relationships that are built between nation states. But in the UN system, to become a member of the UN, you have to go to the Credentials Committee of the UN and your credentials as a nation state and ask to be recognized as a member of the United Nations. So that would be the process. You'd have to have a government that is, formally constituted, that can claim legitimacy over a territory. Those are two things, very important things.
If I got you right there, you are saying there would have to be a government that claim legitimacy over a territory. So if I may ask, does the context of the Southern Cameroon's interim government works or applies? Would it apply in this case?
Well, the problem will be, just speaking as a person who has studied how nations eventually become recognized, the problem would be, does the interim government actually control the territory? That's going to be a big problem, because if it only controls part of the territory, like only rural areas or something, that would be, it would be a real problem to be recognized as the official government of that country. If it, on the other hand, really controlled the country, then I suppose you'd have a better chance of recognition and claiming of nation-state status. This is a hard one for a lot of international lawyers, because I think since the independence era, when a lot of this was discussed, of course, that's really where to look for the historical precedents. You're right to look back to the early 60s, because that's when a lot of this happened.
Yeah, because the 60s are where this, you find the root causes to this conflict that we're having today. The Southern Cameroons was voted 64-23 by United Nations, including the U.S., to grant independence to the Southern Cameroons. However, instead of granting them independence on the independent basis, they were asked to join either Nigeria or join French Cameroon. But even so, that process was never logically concluded, because they gave the Southern Cameroons sovereignty to join another sovereign state. But the process was never completed, because that union treaty between the two Cameroons never took place. So I guess, again, my caller was saying, what would it take for the powers that be, the international community, to realize a mistake was done? Why shouldn't they go back to 1608 and look at their votes at the United Nations and say, let's fix this thing?
And as you will remember, in 1608, it only gave those two choices. You could either join Nigeria or you could join Cameroon. It didn't give the choice of independence. In other words, it was not, that wasn't allowed to be voted for in the plebiscite. So this was I agree with you, a real mistake. I mean, they should have allowed that. You can argue the same thing for Kashmir, where if you had had a free vote at the time of independence for India and Pakistan, the person who was it was a princely state at the time of independence, he wanted independence for Kashmir. Well, it wasn't ever allowed by either India or Pakistan. So in some ways, you've got a similar situation. Out of it came a plebiscite resolution from the UN that was never carried out. It's Resolution 85, and it went a very early one. In other words, a vote should have been held where the Kashmiris could decide, and it has never been held. So in a sense, you have a similar situation here.
Doctor, it was quite a pleasure having you on ABC. I look forward to coming back to you. I think there is a lot we can learn from you. I shall be talking to you in the background to see what help that you may be to us with your organizations in this struggle for the actualization of the independence of the Southern Cameroons. Thank you for coming on, sir.
Thank you. I really have been enjoying our discussion. It's been a very informative informative discussion to me, too. Thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate it. God bless.
Yeah.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, that was Dr. Stanton. I want to believe that you have gathered a lot from his experience and his wisdom and knowledge on this subject of genocide, especially as it concerns our territory, the southern Cameroons. We have also heard him said, for us to be able to go to the United Nations, you would have to have an independent, declare independence and control at the least, I guess, 80 to 90% of the territory. So that is the task that lies ahead for all of us, Ambazonians. What that means is, it means raising more funds and supporting the restoration forces to continue to take territory just as they have done in Libya. We need to take Nkambe, we need to take Dongamantung, we need to take Bui, we need to take Mezam, we need to take Momo, we need to take Fako, we need to take Meme, Indian, Kupe Maniguba, we need to take Manu, we need to take every county that belongs to us, and taking it means chasing out every colonial officer, administrator in those counties. Dr. Stanton, again, thank you for coming in. Great to see you, sir. And ladies and gentlemen, before I leave, please get to abcambertv.org or .com. Please sign up for Amber ABC Club. Let us keep ABC running and bringing you guests like this one who can illuminate us with what we need to know and what we can do. So please log on to the website abcambertv.org. Sign up for ABC Club. Let's keep it going. I look forward to seeing you in the coming days. And thank you for watching Ground Zero. Now, I learned that is it in Gi? I think it's in Gi and Eso Ata. Hundreds of people are gathering in certain homes watching this broadcast in Eso Ata in Libya and in Gi. It's either in Gi or yeah, I think it's in Gi. It's in Gi in the Momo County. So thank you, all of you. I know there are other places where people are gathered watching this. Thank you. If you are watching, gathered anywhere, anytime watching, let me know. I will call your name. And again, thank you for those of you in Ngi, in the Esota, who are gathering and watching ABC. God bless you all. We can't wait to grab our independence, come home and shake your hands and smile together. God bless you all. See you again next time.